Welcome to our deep dive into Exodus 21 to 3.
Okay.
Now, you're probably already familiar with this passage,
Yeah.
especially if you're, preparing a sermon or leading a Bible study.
Right.
But today, we're aiming for something a little different.
Okay.
We've got a stack of commentaries from pastors across diverse denominations here.
Hmm.
And our goal is to kind of unearth those non-obvious insights.
Right.
The kind that might spark some fresh ideas for your congregations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And trust me, some of these interpretations get pretty creative.
Yeah. What's interesting is how these pastors, even from different theological backgrounds,
Yeah.
they kind of gravitate towards some surprising themes. Like, take the idea of God's jealousy, for instance.
Right.
Comes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Not in the way you might expect.
Right. It's not the petty, envious kind of jealousy we usually think of.
Right.
Grandview Church Davenport uses this really powerful analogy of marriage to illustrate it.
Exactly. They argue that God's jealousy in this context is about his deep longing for an exclusive, intimate relationship with his people. Just like a healthy marriage thrives on that commitment to putting your spouse first.
Right.
Cherishing and prioritizing that bond above all else.
Yeah, and that theme of exclusivity comes up again in the Church Estrella's commentary. But they use a very modern spin on it.
Okay.
They bring up NIL deals in college sports.
Now, that's one I hadn't considered before.
Right.
Their point is that the commandment isn't just about ranking God as number one on a list, but about recognizing that nothing else even comes close. It's not a competition.
Yeah.
It's about understanding God's unique value.
Right.
And realizing he's in a category all his own.
It's like you can have other passions and commitments, sure, but God isn't just another item on a to-do list.
Right.
It's more like he's the foundation on which your entire life is built. So how do you even compare anything else to that?
That's a great way to put it. I can see how that would resonate with people.
Yeah.
Especially those who are feeling pulled in a million directions,
Yeah.
struggling to prioritize their faith.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder that true fulfillment comes from putting God at the center.
Right.
And letting everything else flow from that relationship.
Absolutely. And this focus on God being at the center, it really connects with another theme that popped up in several commentaries.
Okay.
This idea of worship being a lifestyle,
Yeah.
not just a Sunday morning activity.
Yes. First Baptist Church, Peachtree City,
Yes?
especially dives deep into this.
Yeah.
Their argument is that worship isn't just about singing hymns. It's woven into every choice you make, every action you take.
Right.
It's all meant to be a reflection of your love for God.
They even go so far as to say that humans are hardwired for worship. That if we're not directing that inherent need towards the true God, it'll inevitably find another outlet.
Right.
Which, let's face it, isn't always healthy or productive.
That's a challenging thought, but it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
And it leads perfectly into how Mountain View Church tackles obedience.
Okay.
They suggest that real freedom comes from submitting to God's commands. It might sound counterintuitive at first, but
It's kind of like that saying, freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's wanting to do what's right.
right.
And when you choose to place God on the throne of your heart, surrender your will to his, that's where true liberation comes from.
Because his commands aren't designed to box us in, are they?
Yeah.
They're meant to guide us toward a life of purpose and meaning,
Right.
to protect us from straying too far from the path that leads to true fulfillment.
This is such a crucial point for those who might view religion as a bunch of restrictive rules
Right.
designed to stifle their individuality. It reframes obedience as a path to freedom,
Yeah.
a way to align yourself with the one who knows you best and wants the best for you.
I think that could be a really powerful message for a lot of people,
Yeah.
especially those who are skeptical of organized religion or feel like it's trying to control them.
And what I appreciate is that these commentaries aren't just throwing out abstract theological concepts.
Yeah.
They offer some pretty concrete and sometimes surprising examples of how to bring this message to life.
Absolutely. We see these pastors using everything from modern pop culture references
Yeah.
to personal anecdotes to illustrate these ancient truths in ways that resonate with people today.
Yeah.
It's about bridging that gap between the timeless and the timely.
For instance, Mountain View Church incorporates Enneagram types when discussing obedience.
Oh, wow.
What a creative way to connect with people who are familiar with that personality framework.
And then there's Dripping Springs Methodist Church.
Okay.
They draw this fascinating parallel between the Ten Commandments and Jesus' Sermon on the Mount.
Okay.
It highlights how God's message at its core has always been about love and grace. And those principles remain relevant even today.
It shows the continuity, the ongoing story of God's love for humanity, doesn't it?
It does.
And I love how First Baptist Church, Peachtree City, brought it all together with that story about the man who couldn't sing,
Oh, yeah.
but still found his place in the choir.
Oh, that's a beautiful one.
The pastor used it to show that everyone has a unique way to worship, a unique way to express their love for God.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look the same for everyone,
Right.
but it can be just as meaningful and impactful.
It's about finding your own way to connect with the divine, to contribute your unique gifts to the symphony of worship. And that's such an encouraging message, especially in a world that often tries to fit us all into the same mold.
That reminds me of another powerful theme that emerged from these commentaries.
It's this idea that God values our individuality, our unique expressions of faith. It's not about conformity, but about authenticity, about coming to him just as we are.
That's a refreshing perspective, isn't it? And it actually ties in nicely with another point that several of these commentaries touched on,
Okay.
the concept of finding true freedom in obedience.
It's paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
We often think of obedience as restrictive, but these pastors present it as a pathway to liberation.
Right. Instead of constantly second-guessing ourselves, trying to
Right.
figure everything out on our own, we surrender to God's wisdom,
Right.
to his perfect plan for our lives.
And that surrender, that alignment with God's will, is where we find true peace and purpose. Mountain View Church actually used a really interesting analogy
Oh, yeah.
to illustrate this
Well,
point.
tell me about it. I love a good analogy.
They compared it to learning to ride a bike.
Why?
At first, you need those training wheels,
Mm-hmm.
those rules and boundaries to keep you upright and safe.
Right.
But eventually, as you gain confidence and skill,
Yeah.
you can let go of those supports and experience the true freedom of riding on your own.
I love that. It's like God's commands are those training wheels,
Exactly.
helping us stay on track until we develop the spiritual maturity
Right.
to navigate life's challenges with wisdom and grace.
And then as we grow in our faith,
Mm-hmm.
those training wheels become less about external rules.
Right. More about an internal compass,
Yeah.
guiding us toward choices that align with our deepest values and God's will for our lives.
This is so helpful for thinking about how to present obedience to a modern audience,
Right.
especially those who might view it as a form of oppression or control.
Yeah.
It's about reframing it as a path to true freedom,
Mm.
to becoming the best version of ourselves.
It's about embracing the liberating truth that we don't have to have it all figured out.
Right.
We can trust in a God who knows us better than we know ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
who has a plan for our lives that is far greater than anything we could imagine on our own.
And speaking of trusting in God's plan, one thing that really struck me as I was reading these commentaries was how they addressed the challenge of misplaced priorities.
Right.
We live in a world that's constantly vying for our attention,
Mm-hmm.
bombarding us with distractions and demands.
It's the age of distraction, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it makes that first commandment, no other gods before me, feel incredibly relevant.
But it's also incredibly difficult to live out in practice.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle.
Yeah.
To let work relationships, even good things,
Mm-hmm.
take precedence over our relationship with God.
I think that's where that analogy of the NIL deal from the Church Estrella comes in handy.
Right.
It's not just about putting God at the top of the list.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that nothing else even deserves to be on that list. He's in a completely different category.
It's like you wouldn't compare a sponsorship deal with the local pizza place to signing with Nike, would you?
No.
The scope, the impact, the value.
Right.
It's just not on the same level.
And I think that's how we need to view our relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just another commitment in our already jam-packed lives.
Right.
It's the defining relationship that shapes everything else.
And when we view it through that lens,
Yeah.
it makes those daily decisions about how we spend our time,
Right.
our energy, our resources a little bit clearer.
It becomes less about saying no to things and more about saying yes to the one thing that truly matters. It's about choosing to invest in the relationship that has the power to transform our lives from the inside out.
Absolutely. And these commentaries were full of practical examples and illustrations of how to make that happen.
They really emphasize the importance of finding those tangible ways to connect these ancient truths
Yeah.
to our everyday experiences.
I mean, how do we practically weave worship into the fabric of our daily lives?
Right.
It can't just be about those designated times of prayer or Bible study.
Yeah.
It has to be something more integrated, more organic.
Right. It's about finding those God moments in the ordinary.
Yeah.
Those glimpses of beauty and grace that remind us of his presence even in the midst of chaos and routine.
And these pastors offered some really creative ideas for how to do that. For example, First Baptist Church, Peachtree City, shared a beautiful story about. They talked about a woman who started each morning by writing down 3 things she was grateful for.
Okay.
Simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she found that this small act of gratitude shifted her whole perspective.
Yeah.
Helped her see God's hand at work, even in the mundane details of her day.
It's amazing how such a small shift in focus can have such a profound impact.
Yeah.
It's like training our minds to look for those God moments,
Right.
those little reminders of his love and presence throughout the day. And I think that's something that anyone, regardless of their denominational background or theological perspective, it can apply to their own lives.
Absolutely. And it's not just about personal piety, is it?
No.
It's about how those individual God moments spill over into our interactions with others, how they shape our actions and reactions in the world.
Exactly. The commentaries emphasize that true worship isn't just about inward reflection.
Right.
It's about outward expression, about letting our love for God manifest in tangible ways.
And that can look so different for each person, can't it?
It can.
Some people might be called to serve in their communities.
Right.
Others might express their faith through art or music.
Yeah.
Still, others might find their calling in quiet acts of kindness and compassion.
Right. And the commentary celebrated that diversity of expression.
Yeah.
They reminded us that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to worship.
Right.
It's about finding the unique way that God has wired you to love and slave him, to reflect his image in the world.
And I think that's a really empowering message for our congregations, isn't it?
It is.
It gives people permission to step outside of those preconceived notions of what it means to be a good Christian and to embrace their unique gifts and passion.
It frees them to find their own place in the choir, so to speak, even if they can't sing a perfect note.
Exactly. And it makes that story from First Baptist Church, Peachtree City, all the more poignant.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that everyone has something to offer, that God values our imperfect efforts, and that true worship is about the heart, not the performance.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Exodus 20:1-3, what key takeaways would you say stand out for you?
I think the biggest one for me is this idea of moving beyond the surface level, the Sunday school answers, and really wrestling with the deeper implications of these seemingly simple commands.
I completely agree. We've seen how these pastors have taken familiar verses and breathed new life into them, using fresh analogies, relatable stories, and thought-provoking insights.
It's been a reminder that the Bible isn't a static text, but a living word that continues to speak to us in new and relevant ways.
And it's a challenge to us as communicators of the faith to do the same, to find those creative ways to bridge the gap between the ancient and the modern, to make these timeless truths come alive for the people we serve.
So as you prepare to share this passage with your own congregation or study group,
Okay.
here are a few key takeaways to keep in mind.
Remember that God's desire for an exclusive relationship with his people is like a passionate, committed marriage. He wants our whole hearts, not just a fraction of our attention.
Worship isn't confined to Sunday mornings. It's a lifestyle, a way of seeing the world and approaching every aspect of our lives with a heart of gratitude and surrender.
And true freedom isn't found in doing whatever we want, but in aligning our wills with God's, placing him on the throne of our hearts and allowing his wisdom to guide our steps.
These are powerful truths that have the potential to transform lives.
Thank you.
But it's up to us to find those creative ways to communicate them, to make them resonate with the hearts and minds of our listeners.
Yeah.
So here's a final thought-provoking question for you to ponder as you go. What modern-day analogies or stories could you use to illustrate the power and relevance of Exodus 21:3 for your congregation?
What images or experiences from today's world could help them grasp the depth of God's love, the importance of prioritizing him, and the freedom that comes from surrendering to his will? We encourage you to let this question simmer in your mind and see what unique insights you uncover. After all, that's what the deep dive is all about. Exploring familiar territory with fresh eyes and discovering those hidden gems of truth that can enrich our lives and inspire our faith.
Thanks for joining us.